Hello, Canucks fans. Welcome back to another episode of Canucks Conversation, brought to you by Bet365. We're coming to you from the Pacific Toyota Dealer Studios. Visit shoptoyota.ca or your local Pacific Toyota dealer today. My name is David Quadrelli. I am joined by a tardy Harman Dial. Harm, what do you have to say for yourself? Because everybody gives me a hard time every time we're late going to air live on the show. Everyone blames me. I was in the chat at 1:59 pointing out that it was you that was late today, not
Well,
me.
if you were better at leading by example, maybe you wouldn't set a bad precedent for me. I think this is all your fault, actually.
Wow, there's some mental
Leaders are
gymnastics
supposed to
there.
set the tone, aren't you? Aren't you the head honcho essentially of Canucks Army?
Hey, that's a pretty good segue actually, because we're gonna have a conversation about a coach's role in a rebuild. A lot of questions about Adam Foote right now. We're gonna get to that, but before we do that, I want to tell everybody we're a super chat charity partner this season, the BC Mental Health Foundation. If you want to make sure your question or comment gets in the show, hit us with a super chat. Proceeds from our super chat go to the BC Mental Health Foundation, changing the face of mental health and addiction by supporting breakthroughs in care, public understanding, research, and knowledge exchange. Talk about setting an example, Harm. The Vancouver Canucks lose by a final score of 6-3, but hey, they were right there, especially through 40 minutes. It was nice and close. It was a fun game. Do you want to hear my comparison? It felt like, and it was fitting that this was the first seven losses in a row that they've had since the start of the season when Bruce Boudreau got fired. It was fitting that this was their seventh loss, because man, oh man, did last night's game ever feel like a Boudreau style game. Just running gun with a team that you clearly can't keep up with, but your goaltender makes some awesome saves early on and it's close and you're right there. And it was really fun. It was a fun game. It was really fun through 40 minutes, I thought, at least.
Yeah, fully agree with you. It was seriously entertaining, and the main driver of that obviously is that the Canadiens are just an incredibly exciting team. Every night you watch them play, just the amount of speed and skill that they have, not just on one line, but throughout their lineup, their forwards, their defensemen. You look at the way that a guy like Alexander Carrier, who's not even one of their main offensive options on the back end, is able to join in the rush and score a couple of goals in the second period. That team just brings out the fun in a lot of games, right? The same way that you watch an LA Kings game and they just suck the oxygen out of games. And last week I was watching a Kings Lightning game, and I've watched a lot of the Lightning this year. And I was like, man, how did the LA Kings manage to make the Tampa Bay Lightning boring? Like, that's just, it was mind blowing. But the Canadiens have the opposite effect, where because of their quicker, fast paced style, where they want to attack and transition, they bring out the fun side of teams, and the Canucks under Adam Foote haven't been afraid to be a team that trades chances. Right? If this was Rick Tocchet hockey, I don't think they would have been as open-minded about engaging in a track meet style of game. But that's what it felt like. Where the Canadiens, especially even through the first 40 minutes, had the far greater share of shots and scoring chances, and part of it was Tolopilo playing really well to keep the score level. But also the Canadiens just whiffed on some of their chances finishing wise. I can think of one or two for Kapanen that probably could have buried. But the point was, at least there was some kind of pushback where Canucks counter punched quite frequently, especially against that Arbor-Xhekaj pairing. I think they found that was the weak spot to target. So, yeah, I mean, the Canucks were clearly outmatched. The Canadiens have way more talent than Vancouver does, but at least it was fun from an entertainment perspective. I thought anyway.
Oh, 100% agree with you. Do you agree with me, though, that it was a little Boudreau style? It reminded you of the
Yeah.
Boudreau era?
I mean, they don't know how to
lost.
defend. they just don't know how to defend, which outside of maybe a stretch of 4 or 5 weeks from mid-November to mid-December, that's been the story of the year, is they are one of the worst defensive teams in the NHL.
I don't have much else on the game. I really don't. You kind of touched on everything that I wanted to say. I don't have much else to add. Do you have anything? Because I want to shift gears a bit here and talk about the Ottawa Senators.
Yeah, the one thing I'd say is I thought the deployment from that game was a little bit odd, right? I saw Brock Boeser played 21-40 last night, so almost 22 minutes. And then you compare that to Elias Pettersson who was down at 1640. And that just, to me, that doesn't make sense because you've got Boeser who we know, like on the scoreboard, it's been a really hard stretch for him the last 20 to 30 games to get on the score sheet, to make a difference offensively. He, like, the Canucks continue to play him a ton, and not to say that they should be restricting his ice time, but you have an underperformer right at the top playing nearly 22 minutes, and then you have Elias Pettersson down at 1641 playing less than David Kampf, right? Like, now the difference it was 4 seconds, right? So it's not to say that Kampf played way more than Elias Pettersson, but especially with Pettersson trending in the right direction, I thought that was odd that there's a 5-minute difference in time on ice between Brock Boeser and Elias Pettersson.
It's worth mentioning. It's worth mentioning. Adam Foote talked about that post game, not that specifically, but he talked about the Kampf line, and he talked about that trio with Garland and Boeser with David Kampf, and he just said, like, yeah, we trust them in their own end, and that was basically the crux of it. Drance asked about it, actually, and he just talked about how much he trusts that line, and they can play defense, and they can keep the puck out of the net. Did Brock Boeser go to -25 last night? He was a -2 on the night, was he not?
He was a -2. Yeah, I don't know what his plus minus is on the season.
-25. He's a -25 on the season. He was already worse in the league at -22. He's -25. He was also -25 last year. But hey, how much lower can they go? We'll see. Brock Boeser -25 on the season.
We're gonna have to have a deeper dive conversation into Boeser's struggles at some point, but I don't think we're gonna have that conversation today. But one observation from
okay, go on. Sure, sorry.
Well, one observation from last night is I can't remember. I can't count the number of times, even just in the first period, where as the second man in the forecheck, he's half a step too slow, and we've always known that his foot speed is the weakest part of his game, but it wasn't as like the timing for how he's engaging on the forecheck. It feels worse than it used to be, right? Like I can remember times in the year they won the division, or even in some of the later Travis Green years, where Boeser, despite being just as slow, was still able to win board battles, be quick enough to disrupt the opposition. Whereas it feels like it's way too easy to break out against Boeser, and it led to his hooking penalty in the first period, and that was only one of like 4 or 5 examples that I had jotted down. Even some of the shifts they had in the first period where that line spent some time in the attacking zone, and before Pettersson scored, it should be noted that it was that Garland Boeser Kampf line that changed the momentum, because the Canadiens came out roaring, and then Garland's line finally got set up in the offensive zone, which stemmed the bleeding. Then the Elias Pettersson line goes out next shift and scores. So that Garland line kind of set the table, but really it was Garland doing all the heavy lifting, zone entries, puck retrievals. It wasn't really Brock Boeser there.
How much of that comes down to anticipation, man? Like, I think it comes down to knowing that JT is going to rim the puck around, when he's going to do it, all of the body language that's coming leading up to him rimming the puck around, and then Boeser getting into the zone. I think a lot of that stuff that you're talking about comes down to anticipation. And the thing I was going to say when I rudely interrupted you was that you say you want to have a big deep dive on Brock Boeser, but if I were you, I'd probably be taking a victory lap, because I was the one talking about, oh, Brock Boeser this, Brock Boeser that. And you were saying, I don't know if he's going to be able to play well without JT Miller. And I mean, I think that's the selling point if you're talking about selling Brock to another team, is just like, hey, he was great until we didn't have a center for him to play with. So if you've got a center and you don't have a scoring winger, he's a great piece for your team. That's the way you sell a team on Brock Boeser. I think, like, I'm assuming, and I'm not saying we don't need to have a deep dive on Brock Boeser, but I think it is at least worth pointing out, and you taking a minor victory lap, that you pointed it out. Like, how's he going to do without Brock Boeser? And you were even saying, like, probably not very well.
Yeah, he in his career has shown, even when, like, I remember a year or a stretch under Bruce Boudreau where they bumped Boeser down to the third line, and he was playing with Sheldon Dries, and the thought was, all right, Brock, you haven't quite found your fit further up the lineup. We're gonna send you down to the third line. And the thought there is, okay, you don't have the best line mates to work with, but you're in a third line role, which means that you're going to have more favorable matchups against the other team's second and third pair defensemen, against the opposition's bottom six. That should theoretically be an environment where you can make more of an impact driving play, and being what Connor Garland was for the Canucks in the 23-24 season, where you remember when Garland on that line with Joshua and Bluger was just crushing other teams' bottom six lines and their second and third pair defense.
Yeah.
But that's just never been Boeser's game. Is he doesn't have the quickness, the play driving elements. He's not somebody that's going to be carrying the puck up the ice, not going to be a puck dominant player, not going to be the guy causing havoc on the forecheck. And this is a bigger picture question now, because even when Marco Rossi comes back, I don't think that Rossi is necessarily the right stylistic fit for him either, because Rossi himself has been more of a complementary player. He's been more of a net front player where I need a winger who can do more of the puck dominant stuff. And as Marco Rossi, I'm going to get open around the slot, around the net front area, and I'm going to finish chances. It's kind of the same role between Rossi and Boeser from that standpoint. So yeah, it is a legit worry for me.
Canucks in Ottawa tonight. They take on the Senators, who are also struggling. Obviously, there was all the drama with them last week that we talked about. They put out the statement. We talked about that last week. I don't want to talk about that again. We don't need to revisit any of that. Actually, Travis Green said today that Linus Ullmark is working to rejoin the team. So, yeah, I mean, for those of you who are like, oh, Ullmark is obviously going to be traded because everything, anyways, whatever. Ullmark working to rejoin the team, which is obviously good to see. So the Senators have had a really, really tough time keeping the puck out of their net this season. Goaltending's been a really big part of it. I haven't watched a ton of Senators games, but from what I've seen, like, they're not absolutely horrible defensively. They're not an elite defensive team by any means. I mean, if you're having trouble keeping the puck out, you rarely are. But their goaltending has really been disappointing this season for the Senators.
Oh, it's the biggest reason they're in the position they are right now. Outside of a playoff spot, I have watched a decent number of Sens games this year, and I still like a lot of their team. I think it's not just goaltending that's the biggest issue, but I remember watching like really early in the season a game against the Florida Panthers they played, where anyone who was just checking the score after the game would have saw, oh, Senators lost 5-2, and you think that's the kind of score line suggesting that the Sens weren't even in that game. Yet when I watched it, it was a case of Ottawa's controlling play. They're creating more shots. They're actually generating some quality chances at 5-on-5 as well. More so than the Panthers. They're arguably outplaying them, but then just two absolute softies that Linus Ullmark surrenders. And then like, what can you do? It completely changes the complexion of that game. So yeah, to me, goaltending by far the number one reason, where even if they had league average goaltending,
yeah,
they would comfortably be in a playoff spot. And they're not one of those teams where the defensive environment is so bad that it's like, well, how could any goalie have success in that environment? I legit think watching them play and seeing some of the goals that their netminders have surrendered, that this is netminding issue first and foremost. Beyond that, when you look at the non-goaltending issues for the Senators, the penalty kill has been a problem for basically the entire year, and that's where some of their coverage issues have been apparent. That's where I do think they have an obligation to defend better in front of their goaltenders. And then on the back end, on the right side of their blue line, Nick Jensen, coming off of hip surgery, has fallen off a cliff. Like he looks, I mean, he's 35 years old, so part of it is age as well. But last year in the regular season, he was a solid second pair defenseman for them, playing next to Thomas Chabot. I watched a Sens Caps game last week, I want to say, or maybe the week before that. And Jensen flat out looks unplayable at times defensively. He can rarely move, just a liability out there. So you've essentially lost a top four defenseman. And then there was a period of time where Chabot was injured as well. So that blue line needs reinforcements. Yeah, I still like them as a team, but if they can't get saves, I don't like their chances of making the playoffs.
Levi, I think. Marilainen. Sounds Finnish. He gets the call for the Senators in net tonight. 6-10 on the season. 866 save percentage. He's dropped his last 3 starts. We're assuming Kevin Lankinen goes for the Canucks with Tolopilo starting last night. We got no lineup notes from Adam Foote's pregame media avail. So that sucks. But do you think Tom Willander might get a night out? Like, I wonder if it's Bouillon in, Willander out. I'd like to see Bouillon in, P.O. Joseph out. I mean, you always look at the low ice times. I think Joseph was the low man
He was.
ice time last night, right? Yeah, because Victor Mancini played 18 minutes. It was funny. You and I were like, oh, is it going to be over 12 minutes? And obviously it was. I do wonder if it's going to be Willander that comes out. I hope it's not. I think if you go by ice times, it's P.O. Joseph. It should be Joseph comes out, Bouillon goes in. I think that's probably the way it should be. But I do wonder about the young defenseman in Tom Willander.
Yeah, let's have a broader conversation about the back end with the stat of the day, which is a presentation of Uber Eats. Uber Eats is enabling fans to maximize their fandom all season long with exclusive game day deals on the app. From game day eats to paper plates and napkins, if you're hosting, to all the ingredients you need to make your favorite game day dip. Before, during, and after the game, Uber Eats is assisting every fan's hockey experience all season long. Hashtag crave the stats. I wanted to bring up Mancini's ice time because we were talking about it yesterday. We set the over under at 11.5 and just obliterated the over at north of 18 there, which honestly wasn't a guarantee because you look at Mancini's ice times before last night's game against the Habs. He was at 8:18, 6:56, 12:17, 9:43, and then 15:24 in his season debut this season. So, like, after that season debut and before this most recent game, we're talking about a guy that was in the 7 to 9 minute range in terms of ice time, which suggests that the coach really, really doesn't trust you at all.
Yeah.
Now, the fascinating thing with Mancini drawing in is you've got 4 righties, and I think part of the complication now is how are you going to work 4 righties into the lineup at the same time? And I think having Willander and Hronek on the same D pair, part of the reason I think Willander struggled and the Interlings were rough, right? Outshot 14-4, outscored 3-1 during his 5 and 5 minutes is he's playing his offside. It's very difficult for defensemen, especially young ones that don't have a lot of NHL experience, to play on their offside. So that to me is a long-term question too of, I'm sure the Canucks want to give Mancini a proper look, and I want to see him like get 15 to 17 minutes of ice time if he's going to be in the lineup rather than 7, 8, 9 minutes of ice time, because that's just not a proper opportunity. But it does make it a little bit complicated if you're the coaches to configure the deep pairs. I'm right there with you where I would want to take Joseph out, insert Bouillon. I wouldn't want to just take Willander out. But then the question is, how are you going to work 4 righties together, and who's going to play on that offside?
It's a good question because last night it was Willander.
Honestly, I think it has to be one of the vets, right? I don't think you can ask.
Why doesn't Marcus Patterson do it? He's done it before in his career.
It was a lefty.
Oh, sorry.
Because you got Myers and Hronek are the 2 vets, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to ask Mancini or Willander to play the left side because they're just trying to get their feet wet.
Yes.
In an NHL environment, they're trying to make sure that going back for pucks on defensive zone retrievals, they're making the right shoulder checks, scans, reads, and then now when you
have vets for, this is what you have the vets for.
Yeah, so I think that is where I would lean, is take Joseph out, bring Bouillon in, and then ask either Myers or Hronek to play the left side. But it is not ideal long term to have 4 righties in the lineup at the same time. Any coach will tell you that. Same thing on if it were the other way around, we had 4 lefties and 2 righties, where if you needed to have a lefty on the right side, most NHL coaches prefer playing left shot defenseman on the left side, right shot defenseman on the right side, unless you're like a Mackenzie Weegar or Amira
Yeah.
Heiskanen, where it's like you've proven you can do this for years.
Yeah. So no other lineup notes for the Canucks tonight. Anything else you want to say as we kind of look? Like Ottawa's really struggling right now. Something's got to give tonight. I think that was the title Jeff went with for today's edition of Scenes from Morning Skate over at CanucksArmy.com. But the Ottawa Senators, yeah, they are struggling. They're at 45 points through 44 games. Yeah, just the Senators got off to a good start. I really did think this was going to be a year for them. It's not over. It's not over by any means. The East is so damn close, but they've lost 4 straight.
Yeah, and one thought I had, and I can't remember who it was, but somebody pointed out that Sens GM Steve Stales was there in person for the Canucks Habs
Yeah,
game.
Bruce Garrioch just reported that he was there scouting the Canucks specifically.
Yeah, so I find that fascinating because the Sens are in a spot where, of course, there's some pressure to save this season to make the playoffs, but also big picture, when you look at that organization, they're in an interesting spot where I see multiple needs on that roster. I've mentioned before the right side of their blue line and adding another top 4 defender. I think that would be their number 1 need. And like, that's where, from a Canucks perspective, I'm not sure they could help Ottawa out because I don't sense that Myers would have an appetite to move his no move clause, and Hronek, I would imagine, is off limits to most teams unless a team pays you an arm and a leg and is just drastically overpaying for the player. But the Sens also could use a top 6 winger. It's felt like when I look at their forward group, like I like some of their pieces, right? I obviously love Tim Stützle, who's having a monster year. You got Brady Tkachuk, Shane Pinto's breaking out. Drake Batherson is around a point per game, but it's that next tier of, you could really use another strong middle 6 driver, especially because Claude Giroux is getting up there in age. He's not going to be able to provide middle 6 value for you for many more years. And that's where I look at the Canucks, and they have guys with term, which could be appealing for the Senators, where you got to remember it's not as tough a sell for free agents as, let's say, Winnipeg, but
Still tough.
It's tough for them to attract free agents. And that means typically if you're going to go out and spend assets to get a guy, you would prefer it to be for a player that you're either confident will resign or already has term baked in. Plus, this is another important point. Senators don't have a lot of tradable assets. They don't have their first round pick this year because of the like the Dadonov, the no trade list fiasco stuff where the league is punishing them for that. And they also don't have the deepest prospect pool. So the perfect fit for them would sort of be, can we find a top 6 or top 9 guy without giving up a lot of assets and somebody that's under team control? And that's where I could see like a Garland, a DeBrusque, or a Brock Boeser being appealing to them, because I can't imagine that the acquisition cost would be through the roof. Plus, in general, there aren't just many top 9 forwards available with term out on the market right now. And especially in the case of Garland and Boeser, there is some familiarity there with Travis Green. Like I would imagine, I would guess, like, sure, you could throw Kiefer Sherwood into that mix as well. But with Sherwood, the question I would have is, would the Senators, who already don't have their first round pick this year, be willing to pay the really high acquisition cost it would presumably take to pry Sherwood out, especially when Sherwood is not under contract beyond the season?
Senators have 3 third-round picks in this year's draft. I think that's worth mentioning.
Yeah,
and they have Buffalo's second as well.
Yeah, so it's like they got some of these like B grade assets, but if you're expecting that the Senators are going to give you like a blue chip prospect or like a first round pick, that's where I'm less confident that they'd be willing to do that for, let's say, a rental like Kiefer Sherwood. But when it comes to, like, I don't know, I'm just thinking about this. If I was Ottawa, yeah, I'd be kicking tires to see if I could pry Connor Garland out from Vancouver.
Especially if it's for what we're talking about here, like a third round, like a couple third round picks, a second round pick, that type of thing. Especially if you can get him at a low acquisition cost. How about Drew O'Connor? We talked about him when it came to the Winnipeg Jets last week when we were talking about teams that might not be making the playoffs this year, but would want to improve their middle six forward group, and the Jets fit that billing, and Drew O'Connor seemed like a match for them. Do you think about Drew O'Connor at all? I mean, hell, if Steos was watching last night, Drew O'Connor looked like McDavid last night at a couple different points in the game. So do you think Drew O'Connor might be an option for Ottawa?
That's a good question. Perhaps the part that I'd be unsure about in terms of O'Connor for Ottawa is whether his, like, I know he's having a decent offensive year this season, but let's be honest, O'Connor really is more of a bottom six guy. And he's
cut that out. Don't say that. People listen to this podcast, Arm.
And that's where for the Sens, like I think they need more of like a true like second, third line kind of option. And that's where O'Connor, sure, at his best, is O'Connor somebody that can give you 10 to 15 goals? Yes, but I don't know if I and yeah, sure, you could maybe like just throw a third round pick or something and try and build a package around that. The acquisition cost probably wouldn't be that high, but I don't know if it would be a significant enough upgrade. And I'd probably be aiming higher. I'd rather than giving, let's say, like trying to throw on proposals where I'm giving up a third round pick for a bottom six winger. I'd rather try and, you know, package together a couple of those third round picks and one of my B tier prospects to get a more needle moving player for my middle six.
Jay Mobs in the chat. This is a great comment. He said Ottawa wants to put back together the DOC Pinto Garland line from World Championships, Team USA.
They were actually a wagon together.
What a third line. What a third line. All right. Okay, here's the thing though. If you actually did build a package around that, someone in the chat said it. Like if they're getting Garland, you're looking for their 2027 first round pick.
You are. I am curious, and I should ahead of the deadline try and ask other teams about their perspective on what Garland's trade value actually is. But I have a tough time nailing down what exactly Garland is worth, because to me, I'm a big fan of the player, and when I look at his pure on ice value, I logically think he should be worth a first round pick. However, Garland is going to be a polarizing asset around the league because of his size, and because I think a lot of teams would view him as a third liner in an ideal situation. Plus, you had the contract extension on top of that, a 6x6 kicking in next season, which takes him well into his 30s. And to me, I think that's a totally fine contract. If I was a buying team, I would have no issues about taking that deal on. And I would think, yeah, that's a fair value deal for a player that is an excellent 5-on-5 driver. But again, I can see other teams looking at that and going, that's a little bit expensive. That's a little bit too rich for a small third liner.
It's also kind of risky if you're Ottawa to give out a 2027 first round pick. A little bit risky. And someone in the chat brought this up too. What about like their second and 2/3? Because you're assuming those are high in the draft.
Yeah.
And yesterday, so we agree on that. Like that's a potential package. But someone pointed this out yesterday too. I don't know who it was. I apologize. But the Canucks, like if the standings stay, who lost their first round pick? Was it Ottawa that lost their first round pick this year?
Yeah.
Okay, so they're just going to skip over it, right?
Yeah.
So technically, the Canucks second round pick, which would be the first pick of the second round, technically that would be the 32nd overall pick, right?
Yes.
So that's basically another first round pick.
Okay. Like I've seen people saying that, and while that's technically true, if you want to classify that as technically a first round pick, which sure.
You're sure the team will. You're sure the team will.
Yeah. But then that means you don't have a really high second round pick. Does that make sense? If you're classifying that pick as another first round pick, well then all right, you technically then don't have a second round pick.
I'd rather have a first than a second, Harm. Duh.
Sure, but it's like you can't say, oh, we've got 3 first round picks without glossing over the fact that then
watch them.
They probably will. But anyway, the point I was trying to make with Garland is I wonder if he's the type of player where there's a discrepancy between his on ice hockey value and his trade value. Like I've wondered that for a long time because the Canucks have put Connor Garland on the trade block before, at earlier points during the Rutherford Alvin
Yeah.
era, and
Don't you think he was kind of a distressed asset at that time, though? Like, he wasn't playing well.
but he was still. It's not like he was playing horribly, and he was
Yeah, but
still
I
making
think he
4.95.
Yeah, but I think he gained, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in league-wide circles, I think he's gained the reputation as like a play-driving middle six winger in recent years. I think that kind of development in his game, where he started to get some recognition for what he does, came after that. Now I might be
Well,
wrong, but that's
I'll
how
be
I
honest.
remember it.
I don't think it's improved a ton because the low
Mm,
point for Garland's point production in Vancouver was 46 in the 2022-23 season. Right. So even when Garland was having a quote unquote down year, he was still a 46-point player, which it's not like he's a 60, 70-point guy now that his
yeah,
production has taken off. And like the point I'm making is I agree with you that we were talking about him as this distressed asset that doesn't necessarily have a lot of value. And part of it was all right, there was less cap space in the system at times. Um, but I don't think Garland's reputation has like the low point wasn't that low, and I don't think that his value has suddenly skyrocketed from that point as a player. I don't think the perception of him has changed a whole lot. Uh, Ultimately, I do go back to that time and think that it's not like teams were blowing the Canucks away with really strong offers, and I still feel that he would be a polarizing asset to teams around the league, and not to say that it's an inefficient contract or the Canucks are going to have a tough time moving it. Like
yeah,
he's still obviously a positive value player and a positive value asset. It's just that I don't know that he's necessarily going to get you a massive haul. Put it this way,
yeah,
I think Kiefer Sherwood's trade value is higher than Connor Garland's, even
for
though
sure it
I
is.
think Connor Garland is a better player.
For sure it is. 100% agree with you. The chat's having a really fun time with your thing about not having a second round pick. Uh, Hip Hop in the chat said, "No, your third round pick is actually a second then. So you really just don't have a seventh round pick." I like that logic a lot. So basically, Harman wouldn't trade a seventh round pick to get a first round pick back in return.
Yeah, that's definitely what I said. 100%. You
Glad
got
you
that
agree.
right, buddy.
All right. Ahead of anyone else, I want to tell everybody about our friends over at Greta, a great spot for all games, home and away, and also a great spot for the Super Bowl. They're having their Super Bowl party on Sunday, February 8th, and you should come on down. They've still got space remaining, so make sure you go to gretabar.com, make your reservation, text them for a reservation. Make sure you head on down to Greta. A lot of fun. They're going to have giveaways, prizes, and more for the big game. You want to be there with Shane and his crew down at Greta. Really, really good time. So make sure you head on down to Greta Bar, YVR, 50 West Cordova Street is the address. Let the games begin. All right, let's get to anyone else. Anyone else is a presentation of Pacific Toyota Dealers and the Toyota Prius plug-in hybrid, a no-compromise approach to electric vehicles that offers the best of both worlds. You can drive up 72 kilometers on the battery alone, enough to get you from downtown to the rink, the grocery store, and home to recharge. You can seamlessly transition from electric mode to the gas engine for a combined range of 962 kilometers. There's no sacrifices when it comes to horsepower or style with its sleek, low, and wide exterior and sophisticated interior. It's loaded with tech that's actually easy to use. You can plug in to recharge at home or at one of the over 2,000 public charge stations in BC alone. And now you can lease a 2026 Prius plug-in hybrid SE from $109 weekly at 3.99% APR for 64 months with $3,300 down. Visit shoptoyota.ca or your local Pacific Toyota dealer today. All right, Harm. I watched Marty St. Louis yesterday. You and I were texting about this. He had the quote when he was asked about skilled players, skilled young players in particular, and he talked about not wanting to overcoach those guys and wanting to let them kind of be themselves. And he was answering a question about Demidov, who's named one of the 3 stars last night, by the way. He was answering a question about Demidov, and we both found it interesting because we were really there's some bigger conversations right now happening in this market about, well, what is a coach's role in a rebuild? Like what's a coach supposed to do during a rebuild? Like they're not trying to lose games, obviously. You're trying to win games. You're trying to instill a strong culture. But you're also trying to make sure that young players develop. That's how I look at it anyway. And I think Marty St. Louis has done a really good job of all of those things.
100%. And when I look at some of the specific challenges and tasks that come with properly developing young talent in the NHL, which, as you noted, is the number one priority for a head coach during rebuilding phase. One of them is teaching these young players NHL habits without limiting their offensive creativity and growth, which is what the St. Louis quote was all about. I look at Greg Cronin, the former head coach of the Ducks, as that's an example of a head coach that went too far. Where, yeah, I 100% understand that you need to teach some of these guys responsible two-way hockey, where you look at the World Juniors, for example, Team Canada, so much offensive talent, but they had no idea how to defend. And for those guys to become trustworthy, reliable NHL players, especially to be the types of contributors that can have success come playoff time, you do need to understand defensive positioning, how to manage the puck, understanding how to manage the game in different scenarios, back checking, all of these different, like forechecking, all of these different details, wall work. These things do matter. However, how do you do that without stunting their creativity and growth? And Cronin was an example of harping too much on those details, of like this excessive focus on structure, and to the point where he robbed the creativity and growth of Leo Carlsson, Cutter Gauthier, Trevor Zegras. Look at how all three of those players have thrived since the coaching change. Zegras has obviously happened in Philly, but for Carlsson and Gauthier really breaking out. And I know the Ducks have slid recently out of a playoff spot, but Cronin 100% went too far in that direction. But you also can't go too far in the direction of, well, we're just going to let the young players do whatever they want, because that's when they're going to pick up bad habits. And when it comes time to winning games and taking the next step as a team, you're going to be the type of team that blows leads. You're going to be the type of team that has no defensive structure. And I actually look at Travis Green's time in Vancouver as he did a pretty reasonable job of managing both things, of teaching some of the core players responsible two-way hockey without sacrificing their ability to produce offensively. Elias Pettersson, I thought, did that pretty well. And like, Pettersson came in and a lot of people were talking about, is he going to have to start at wing? And I think a lot of people would have looked at how skinny he was and slapped him on the wing to begin his NHL career. Travis went, no, I'm going to stick him right down the middle. And I trust him. And we're going to find that balance between offensive production and two-way ability. I think he did a great job with Elias Pettersson. Even with Brock Boeser, there were, of course, highs and lows for Boeser production-wise while Travis was here. But Green was really hard on Brock. I don't know if you remember, but he was really hard on Brock as far as he can't just be a one-dimensional guy. And it's too bad, because I think Brock's habits have kind of regressed this season defensively. But there was legitimate progress to the point where in that 23-24 season, when Brock was playing on that line with JT Miller, that was their matchup line going up against Connor McDavid in a playoff series. And Brock wasn't just scoring 40 goals, but that's the stage where, when I was looking at his board work, his forechecking, he had taken strides there. And I don't think he would have been able to hold up in that kind of role had it not been for just how hard Travis was on Brock about some of those details, which, again, ironically, I think they've slipped this season. And even Nils Höglander, right? Nils Höglander had the most success in Vancouver under Travis compared to any other coach he's had here, right? He scored 27 points in 56 games in that rookie year as a 20-year-old. And under Travis, he averaged 15 and a half minutes. Since then, he's never averaged 15 and a half minutes in a given year. He's been an 11 to 12 minute player under Bruce, under Tocchet, under Adam Foote. But to me, again, I don't think, Travis isn't, I'm not holding him up as, oh, he's the gold standard and he's the best of the business at it by any means, because I think that would be more Marty St. Louis. But I think Green is an in-house, like, Vancouver example of a coach who actually found a pretty decent balance.
The reason I bring this up, and I think you're absolutely right about all the stuff about Travis and this next wave, right, is I had someone in my DMs last night just basically asking, Do you think Adam Foote's going to be here at the start of next season? And I haven't given it much thought. I don't know. Have you given it much thought about, because we've already come on the show and been like, okay, I think we said a month ago, we were like, okay, if you fire Adam Foote, you might get a dead cat bounce and go from 32nd to 27th. Like, Adam Foote is part of the problem, just like Rick Tocchet was part of the problem last year. Like, Adam Foote's part of the problem, sure, but well, maybe not just like Tocchet, but Adam Foote's part of the problem. But the point we were making is that, like, okay, firing Adam Foote isn't going to do much for you other than maybe ruin your tank. And not to say like Adam Foote's coaching is what's causing them to tank. It's just sometimes a new voice, guys are reinvigorated and they start to string together some wins. That's just hockey. Like, I'm not, that wasn't me saying, oh, if you get rid of Foote, he's the problem. He'll figure everything out. We've seen the bounce in Vancouver when you fire a coach, but I don't know about the start of next season. I started to think about that. I really don't know about the start of next season. Manny's got this year left on his deal or no, he extended, right? Did Manny extend beyond this year? Or is this, yeah, he extended beyond this year. This was going to be his final year in Abbotsford, but he signed on for another season afterwards. So, like, I know everybody's looking at Manny Malhotra as like the guy, and this isn't so much a conversation about Manny. It's not a conversation really about Foote either. It's just with a rebuilding team, when we talk about a coach's role in a rebuild, you kind of need to figure out who your guy to grow with your team is going to be through that rebuild. You brought up the Ducks and Cronin. They figured out, I think, too little too late, personally. And I mean, that's not even a hot take. I don't know why I said personally. That they decided too late that Cronin wasn't their guy. With the Canucks, like, I don't think they're at risk of being too late if they keep Foote for the season. I don't think they're at risk of being too late on bringing in a new voice to be the next voice to help grow this team. I don't think I think there's still so much work to be done in this rebuild that I don't think you're in any rush to let go of Foote if that's how you feel.
Yeah, I think it's too early to analyze what happens next season as far as his coaching, because I think a lot of it is going to hinge on what happens for the remainder of the campaign. How do your young players look? And to me, when it comes to some of these important pillars for rebuilding coach, like teaching these kids NHL habits while still giving them enough breathing room to grow offensively, like, I think we are still learning whether Foote is going to be capable of that, because, like, I'll give him credit. I think with a player like Zeke Bouillon, even though he was a healthy scratch last night, Foote hasn't been babying him in terms of the deployment, right?
Yeah.
He's been giving him 21 minutes a night nearly in average ice time. I think even just generally speaking with the back end, at least in terms of pure opportunity, right? Like, Tom Villander's had a consistent opportunity. Even DPD, I think Adam Foote's been very patient with DPD's mistakes. I think there are a lot of coaches that would have seen, like, just with the number of like pinches that have led to goals against, that would have yanked him out of the lineup a lot earlier. And I actually think, like, from an opportunity standpoint, Foote's at least given the leash. Now you can quibble with, well, DPD taking a step back to compared to last year. Is that a poor reflection on Adam Foote? And that's a completely valid question. But at least in terms of the opportunity on the back end, I haven't had too much of an issue with how he's managed these defensemen. Now it's all right. How much progress do these guys make? Because if DPD at the end of this season, whenever he inevitably is recalled and given another look, if he looks the same way that he looks now, that's a concern to me. Because this is a player that, a year ago under Rick Tocchet looked like a competent everyday NHL defenseman. And now, I don't blame the organization for sending him back to the A, because he doesn't look like he belongs in the NHL as of this moment. How much does Tom Villander improve? Do we see continued legitimate strides for him? Zeke Bouillon, right? A couple of rough games, I'd say, turnovers leading to goals against, but by and large, he's been okay. Like, I don't have an issue with the start to his Vancouver tenure, but I want to see him continue to take steps. And then even up front, how does Ogren look? How does what happens with Nils Höglander, with Atu Ratu? Like, I think a lot of these are still TBD. And I think at the end of the season, that's where I would want to take a look once we have a bigger sample of these young players in their foot of, okay, how many of these guys took steps? What kind of opportunity were they given? Do we feel as an organization we're moving in the right direction?
And someone, when it comes to Manny, said, and it was Knuckle Puck, said, "Nah, bring in Manny when the Canucks are closer to being competitive." And I think that's the interesting part of the conversation is like, when do you find your coach who's going to lead you to the next wave? For the Habs, because we were just talking about them, they fired Dom Ducharme at the start of the 21-22 season. Now, Ducharme might have been gone earlier. It's important to remember the year they went to the final was that Canadian division year. They had a .487 win percentage and went to the Stanley Cup final that season. It was a weird year, but obviously that helps your head coach kind of stick around. But they really made that decision of, okay, we're gonna do this properly. We're gonna take the step back. We're gonna do the rebuild in that season. And it was midway through that season when they brought in Marty St. Louis. And I mean, you've all seen the documentary, right? The docu-series, the rebuild of the Habs. They brought in Marty St. Louis kind of midway through that first year where they said, like, okay, it's time we start to really do that. So if you're going by that timeline, and I mean, Adam Foote's only been here half a season, then that was the argument that was being made is, well, that's the timeline that the Habs did. You got to bring in Manny Malhotra right now. I disagree with that, partly because of what you just said as well, of like, yeah, I don't think Adam Foote's system's been a good fit, but look at the centers he has to work with. Look at the defensemen he has to work with. It's a young team. There's a lot of teaching that has to go on. And I'm not saying like, oh, Adam Foote's a phenomenal coach. I think he's going to be the guy to lead them through this. I just don't think this season is the time to make that switch. Like, and I'm just answering that. Like, I really don't think this is the time to make that switch.
I don't think anybody was talking about making that switch mid-season. It's more, all right, at the end of the season for next year. Like, that's a more legitimate conversation. And to me, while I agree that he's been dealt a really tough hand, I mean, how many coaches would actually have success with, David Kampf as your 2C or Lucas Reichel as your 2C? And even if you want to say, oh, well, Aatu Ratu should have been the 2C, like that doesn't really change things a ton in terms of your team's success. With that said, I still see some red flags, right?
For sure.
The deployment stuff, right? I brought it up, like Boeser was at nearly 22 minutes last night. Meanwhile, David Kampf is playing more than Elias Pettersson. Like, that doesn't make sense to me, even really early in the season when Philip Heedle's 5-on-5 ice time was higher than Elias Pettersson's, and Pettersson was in the mid 16-minute range. Like, that didn't make sense to me at the time either. I obviously haven't loved the way that he's managed Aatu Ratu for the year as a whole, and like the system defensively, like they've completely lost their floor compared to last year. And I also do think there's an element of, you also want your vets to be succeeding because they need to retain their value, right? They need to retain their value, whether it's to, like, you want your vets succeeding because if they're then with the organization, they're at least proper mentors, and they're like, I think they're better equipped. Put it this way, a guy like Philip Pronik that's like firing on all cylinders right now, he doesn't have to focus a ton on his own game right now, in the sense that he's not in his own head about that. So he can devote more of his attention to focus to, well, how can I help the young players? Whereas like a lot of Brock Boeser's probably in his own head right now about how do I get my game back on track? And like, I don't think struggling vets are best equipped to helping young players develop, because they're preoccupied with how do I get my game back on track? And then there's the other angle of, well, if you want to like move some of these guys on, you want them to ideally be playing well so they have significant trade value, right? So that's where, when I look at, outside of Philip Pronik and Elias Pettersson, a lot of the vets that Foote inherited have, taken a step back. When I look at Marcus Pettersson, when I look at Brock Boeser, when I look at Jake DeBrusk, especially at 5-on-5, Tyler Myers, even compared to where he was at under Adam Foote. So, or under Rick, where he was at under Rick Tocchet. So yeah, this is going to be something that I think is worth keeping a close eye on over the remainder of the season. Is you want to see things at least start to move in the right direction, even though we expect that this team is probably going to finish the season near the bottom, if not at the very bottom of the league standings anyway.
Anything else on coaching that you wanted to get to?
No, I think we can transition to some of the viewer questions.
Sweet. They're mostly about Adam Foote. People want me to break out the whiteboard. We've already done that. Some news around the league I wanted to get to. We didn't even talk about it yesterday. Dean Evison fired in Columbus. Rick Bowness coming in to make the Blue Jackets feel good about themselves again. Lawrence Gilman didn't take long to make that move, you would think. Yeah, Dean Evison. I was kind of surprised that Evison was the first coach gone.
Yeah, it's this is where what I said before, right? Coaches are hired to be fired. Columbus is having a really rough year. They've been blowing leads, underperforming expectations, so it's a lot easier to fire the head coach than it is to rejig the roster. And in fairness, the Blue Jackets at least did go and acquire Mason Marchment to try and spark the group. But this is also where a take that I've had is, as a head coach, one of the worst things you can do is for the sake of your own job security is outperform and overachieve in one season, because what that does is it sets the bar higher than it maybe should be for your team than the next year, right? Where Dean Evison last year, he was being praised like he was practically a hero in that market for the way that he brought the Blue Jackets together after the Gaudreau brothers tragedy, where the Blue Jackets, people were expecting them to be bottom 5 team in the NHL. They defied all expectations and finished just 2 points out of a playoff spot. But what that did is, now that sets a new standard and expectation level for this season where, all right, now everybody in that organization expecting you to make the playoffs. Whereas had you finished bottom 5 in the league like everybody had initially anticipated, then you have a lot more grace and leeway in terms of your expectations for this season. So even for Rick Tocchet, right? He has everything go perfectly right in his first year as Canucks head coach, wins the division, goes to the second round of the playoffs, and then immediately when he doesn't then meet that standard, well, then now everybody's pointing the finger at him of like, why haven't you been able to steer this team into the playoffs? So, yeah, I'm interested to see whether Bowness can give them the new coach bump, and ultimately I do feel for Evison, because again, I think for most of his tenure in Columbus, he had done which was only a year and a half. He'd done a pretty decent job. The other point I wanted to bring up with this coaching change is I think the Jackets have had 5 coaches since Tortorella left at the end of the 2021 season.
Look it up, and I want to try to name them.
Yeah, okay. I'll
tell
double
me if
check
the number's actually 5, and then I'll try to name them.
1 second.
It's not 5. It's not 5.
It might be, dude, because I think
5.
Okay.
If it is, I can only name 3 or 4.
3, 4. I'm counting Bowness.
Oh, okay. Okay.
5th. Yeah. Okay. So counting Bowness 5 since 2021.
Who is Pascal Vincent? Whatever. Obviously Dean Evison.
Yep.
Rick Bowness. Oh, there was someone in between that I'm forgetting.
Mike Babcock.
Who
was fired before he officially coached a regular season game.
That's why I forgot. Oh my gosh, Mike Babcock, yeah. And then
there was also Brad Larson. He was the first coach they hired after Tortorella was let go.
Wow.
He had 2 seasons under the helm. Well, actually the longest tenured of all those guys since Tortorella got fired. But yeah, this is going to be their 5th head coach.
Yeah, that's wild. 4th to actually step behind the bench. All right. Around the league, quickly. Wanted to get to this as well. There's some headlines around the league. Where should we start? Let's go to... Actually, nah, it's okay. We don't need to talk about it. I don't know. I had like just a run ahead. Okay, yeah, I want to get to this one. I'll get to this one. This is the one I really wanted to talk about because we're running a little late here for a game day with this game about just a little over an hour away. See, Jack Hughes and Quinn Hughes faced off last night, and I mean Luke was there too. But the Hughes Bowl last night, and Jack Hughes talked about how he never watched the Minnesota Wild.
Yes.
In conversation with Michael Russo, right? Jack Hughes says he never really watched the Minnesota Wild before the Quinn Hughes trade, but he's watched a lot of games since then, talking about how fun it's been to watch him snap it around with Kaprizov and Matt Boldy. The Devils won last night. The Devils beat the Wild quietly. I know we were all talking about, as someone put it, I've been glazing the Wild, is what someone messaged me. Anyway, we were all, looking at the impact that Hughes was having on the Wild, and it was pretty dramatic. But they're quietly, and I know not all of them have been in regulation, but I think they're like 8-7 now. I mean, not all of those are. I got to look up the actual regulation losses, but they lost last night to the Devils.
Yeah, the issue for them is they've been dealing with a lot of other injuries. Like I think they're getting healthier now, but there was like I remember watching, I want to say a game week and a half ago or so where I was like, okay, like this lineup seems a little bit depleted. I can't remember off the top of my head who was missing, but like injuries have been part of the story in Minnesota where even since Quinn has gone there, they've been dealing with a lot of guys sort of in and out of the lineup.
They were just so dominant for those first like 8 games that he was there. It was ridiculous. And I mean I think I ran through it on the show, but they had, actually I don't know if I actually said this on the show. I did the math on this, okay? The Wild played like 32 games without Quinn Hughes, okay? They scored 5 or more goals 6 times in all of that time, okay? Through their first 10 games with Quinn Hughes, they scored 5 or more goals 6 times. They matched it in 10 games compared to their first 32 without him.
Damn. Yeah,
I did a bunch of legwork on a piece, and then I never actually wrote it. I thought I read. Hold on, I'll just pull up my doc. I did a bunch of research about Hughes' impact on the Wild, and I wrote it before their back-to-back that they had in LA. So the information's only like a week old. Obviously, they've lost some games since then, but yeah, the one that stood out was that one about the five at least 5 goals in games. It was 6 times before the trade, and then 6 times in just 10 games after the trade at that time.
Yeah, and I looked it up because I wanted to, figure out who specifically had been out for a while. So in late December, they had 7 injuries at one time, where no Brodin, no Middleton. So that's 2 of your like better defensemen who play a lot of minutes, and then no Zuccarello, Johansson and Hiddenstroh. So not to say that, the Wild have been way unluckier than other teams in terms of injuries, because everybody's been dealing with ailments, the Canucks included, obviously. But the point being, when you look at their games since Quinn Hughes has arrived, like that is part of the story. It's not like you got a full strength Minnesota Wild team and that has been pushing at a decent but unspectacular rate.
All right, anything else?
No, I'm good.
Okay, cool. Let's get to our Bet365 bet of the day, which is brought to you by our friends at Bet365. Really busy NHL slate tonight. Lots of different games to choose from tonight. Ooh. Do you think the Anaheim Ducks snapped their 9-game losing streak? They're at home, but the Dallas Stars are in town. I don't know about that one. I think it might be 10. I think it might be 10 for those old Ducks. We're going Dallas Stars money line. They're only slight favorites tonight in Anaheim. You can get Stars money line at -120 odds. That's our bet of the day. It was brought to you by Bet365. Whatever your bet is, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Download the app and get on the game. Use the code NATION at Bet365. Must be 19 plus to play. If you choose to play, please play responsibly. We will close it out there, folks. For my co-host, Harman Dial, and our technical producer, Jake Frazier, who is behind the controls today. My name is Nate Pedrelli. Thanks so much for the episode of Canucks Conversation.
Canucks Conversation is live Monday through Friday, every weekday at 2 p.m. over on the Canucks Army YouTube channel. Make sure you like, subscribe, and interact in the YouTube live chat every day with us, folks.